When housekeeper Kiana Ellis notices troubling symptoms in her wealthy, distant employer Nathaniel Winters, she risks everything to save his life, even when his own doctor dismisses her concerns. What begins as a professional duty transforms into something deeper as Kiana discovers the lonely man behind the fortune, while navigating betrayal, family crises, and the courage to fight for love. This is a story about seeing beyond surfaces, the power of compassion, and finding unexpected romance in the most unlikely circumstances. Get ready for a journey of healing hearts, second chances, and the strength that comes from truly being seen. Before we start this story, comment below from where you're watching us. The morning sun streamed through the penthouse windows as Kiana Ellis moved quietly through the spacious living room. At 27, she had already spent years working in other people's homes, but this job was different. The penthouse belonged to Nathaniel Winters, Nate to the business world, one of the richest men in the city and possibly one of the loneliest. Kiana adjusted her simple uniform and checked her reflection in one of the many mirrors that lined the hallway. Her dark skin contrasted with the crisp white of her shirt, and she tucked a strand of her braided hair back into place. She had been working here for 3 months, and in all that time, her employer had barely spoken more than a few words to her. "Good morning, Mr. Winters," she said as she entered the kitchen where he sat at the island counter, staring at his laptop. "Would you like your usual breakfast?" Nate barely looked up. "Coffee. Black." That was the extent of most of their conversations. At 33, Nathaniel Winters was at the top of his game in the tech world, or at least he had been until the scandal 6 months ago. Something about financial irregularities in his company that had splashed across every newspaper and business channel. Around the same time, his wife had divorced him, taking half his fortune and leaving his reputation in tatters. Kiana poured his coffee and noticed something she'd been seeing more frequently. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the cup. It wasn't the first time she'd noticed it, but today it seemed worse. "Mr. Winters, are you feeling all right?" she asked, unable to stop herself. "I'm fine," he said curtly, quickly pulling his hand back and steadying it with his other hand. Kiana nodded and turned away, but her mind was already cataloging other things she'd noticed. The way he sometimes gasped for breath when he thought no one was watching. How he would suddenly break out in sweats, even though the penthouse was always kept at the perfect temperature, and the sounds she sometimes heard from his room at night, like someone in pain. Her mother had been a home health aide for 30 years before she passed, and Kiana had grown up learning to notice the small signs that something wasn't right. Little things that people tried to hide when they didn't want others to worry. "I'll be working from home today," Nate said, closing his laptop. "I don't want to be disturbed." "Yes, sir. Will you be wanting lunch at the usual time?" He nodded and left the kitchen, but Kiana saw him pause in the hallway, gripping the wall for support when he thought she couldn't see. Something was wrong with him. Very wrong. Later that afternoon, Kiana was folding laundry when she heard a crash from Nate's home office. She rushed in without knocking and found him on the floor, a broken glass of water beside him. "Mr. Winters." She knelt beside him. His face was pale, and he was breathing hard. "I'm fine," he insisted, trying to push himself up. "Just got dizzy for a moment." "This isn't normal," Kiana said firmly, helping him to the couch. "Have you seen your doctor about these episodes?" Nate's face hardened. "That's not your concern. You're overstepping, Miss Ellis." The coldness in his voice stung, but Kiana had dealt with difficult patients through her mother for years. "I apologize, sir, but as someone who sees you every day, I'm concerned. Dr. Reynolds comes by every month. He says it's just stress and burnout from the scandal and divorce." Nate's voice was defensive, but Kiana caught something else in it. Fear. "When is your next appointment with him?" "Tomorrow morning." Kiana nodded. "Would you like me to make you some tea? It might help." He agreed, and, as she left to make it, she made up her mind to speak to Dr. Reynolds herself. Something in her gut told her this was more than just stress. The next morning, Dr. Reynolds arrived promptly at 9. He was a tall, distinguished man with silver hair and an air of authority that immediately made Kiana feel small in her uniform. While Nate was changing for his examination, Kiana approached the doctor in the hallway. "Dr. Reynolds?" I'm Kiana Ellis, Mr. Winter's housekeeper. The doctor barely glanced at her. Yes, I wanted to mention some symptoms I've been noticing. Mr. Winters has been having tremors in his hands, sudden sweating, and I've heard him gasping for breath at night. Yesterday, he collapsed in his office. Dr. Reynolds cut her off with a dismissive wave. Miss Ellis, I appreciate your concern, but Mr. Winters is under considerable stress. The symptoms you're describing are textbook for anxiety and burnout. But, furthermore, he continued coldly, you're significantly overstepping your position. You're the housekeeper, not a medical professional. I've been Mr. Winter's doctor for over a decade. Heat rose to Kiana's cheeks. My mother was a health aide for 30 years. I grew up learning to spot when something's really wrong. That's quite enough, Dr. Reynolds said. I'll thank you not to interfere with my patient's care. Now, if you'll excuse me. He brushed past her, leaving Kiana standing in the hallway, her hands clenched at her sides. She had never felt so dismissed, so insignificant. But the worry gnawing at her wouldn't go away. After the doctor left, Nate emerged from his room looking relieved. Dr. Reynolds says I'm fine. Just need to take it easy and maybe consider a vacation. Kiana nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She busied herself with cleaning, but her mind was racing. She knew what she'd seen, and she knew it wasn't just stress. That night, as she was preparing to leave for her one evening off that week, she heard a thud from Nate's bedroom. Without hesitation, she rushed in and found him sitting on the edge of his bed, clutching his chest, his breathing ragged. Mr. Winters. It's nothing, he gasped. Just need a minute. Kiana sat beside him, taking his wrist to check his pulse. It was racing and irregular. This isn't nothing, she said firmly. And it isn't stress. For the first time since she'd known him, Nate looked directly into her eyes. There was fear there, naked and real. What do you think it is? I don't know, she admitted, but I think you need a second opinion. From a different doctor. Nate pulled his hand away. Dr. Reynolds has been my family's doctor for years. He wouldn't miss something serious. Even good doctors can miss things, Kiana said gently. And sometimes, they see what they expect to see. Nate was silent for a long moment. I have a board meeting tomorrow. I can't deal with this now. And what if you collapse during your meeting? What then? His expression hardened again. That will be all, Miss Ellis. Enjoy your evening off. Kiana stood up slowly, knowing she was being dismissed. Yes, sir. As she gathered her purse and jacket to leave, she felt torn. She needed this job. The pay was excellent, and she was finally building up some savings. Her younger brother, Marcus, was counting on her help with his college tuition, but she couldn't just ignore what was happening. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister, Tanya. You coming for dinner? Marcus is home from college this weekend. Kiana texted back that she was on her way, but as she waited for the elevator, she couldn't stop thinking about Nate, alone in the penthouse, possibly in danger. The dinner at Tanya's small apartment was lively, as always. Tanya's two kids ran around excitedly, and Marcus entertained everyone with stories from his first year at college. But Kiana found it hard to focus. Earth to Kiana, Tanya said, waving a hand in front of her face. You haven't heard a word I've said, have you? Sorry, Kiana said, trying to smile. Just tired. It's more than that, Tanya said, studying her sister's face. Is that rich man working you too hard? Kiana shook her head. No, it's not that. It's just... She hesitated, then told them about Nate's symptoms and her concerns. Marcus frowned. Sounds serious. And this doctor just dismissed you. Like I was nothing, Kiana confirmed. Just the help who should keep her mouth shut. Tanya reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You've always had good instincts. Kentucky, remember how you knew something was wrong with Mom before any of us did? Their mother had died of a heart attack 3 years ago. She had been showing symptoms for weeks, but no one had taken them seriously until it was too late. Not even her own children, except for Kiana. What are you going to do? Marcus asked. I don't know, Kiana admitted. If I push too hard, I could lose my job. But if I do nothing, you wouldn't be you, Tanya finished for her. Mom always said you had healing hands and a seeing heart. Later that night, back in her small room in the penthouse, Kiana lay awake, thinking about her mother. She had worked herself to the bone caring for others, often for wealthy families who treated her as invisible. She had died too young, underpaid, and unappreciated. "I promised I wouldn't end up like you, Mom," Kayana whispered into the darkness. Good enough to serve, never good enough to matter. But as she finally drifted off to sleep, she knew what she had to do. Tomorrow, she would confront Nate directly, even if it cost her everything. Morning came, and Kayana prepared breakfast with extra care. She added a side of fresh fruit that Nate rarely touched, but that she kept offering anyway. When he came into the kitchen, she noticed immediately that he looked worse. His face was ashen, and the circles under his eyes were darker than ever. "Your breakfast, Mr. Winters," she said, placing the plate in front of him. "Just coffee," he muttered, pushing the plate away. Kayana took a deep breath. It was now or never. "Mr. Winters, we need to talk about your health." He looked up, irritation flashing across his face. "I thought we covered this yesterday." "No, sir, we didn't," she said, her voice trembling slightly but determined. "You're sick, really sick, and Dr. Reynolds is missing it." "That's enough, Miss Ellis. Please," she interrupted, something she had never done before. "Just listen to me. My mother died because people ignored the signs until it was too late. I've been watching you for weeks now. The tremors in your hands, the shortness of breath, the dizzy spells, the night sweats. These aren't just stress symptoms." Nate stood up abruptly, but had to grab the counter to steady himself. "I pay you to keep my home in order, not to diagnose me. Fire me if you want," Kayana said, surprising herself with her boldness. "But first, please get a second opinion. See another doctor. What do you have to lose?" For a long moment, they stared at each other across the kitchen island. Then, something shifted in Nate's eyes, a crack in the cold facade. "Why do you care?" he asked quietly. "Why does it matter to you?" The question caught Kayana off guard. Why did she care so much about this man who barely acknowledged her existence? "Because," she said finally, "no one should suffer alone. Not even you, Mr. Winters." Before he could respond, Nate suddenly clutched his chest, his face contorted in pain. He started to collapse, and Kayana rushed around the island just in time to catch him before he hit the floor. "Mr. Winters," she cried, easing him down. "Nate, can you hear me?" His eyes were wide with fear as he gasped for breath. Kayana reached for her phone and dialed 911. "Stay with me," she said, holding his hand tightly as she gave the operator the address. "Help is coming. Just stay with me." As the paramedics rushed Nate to the hospital, Kayana followed in a taxi, her heart pounding with fear and something else she couldn't quite name. All she knew was that she couldn't leave him alone. Not now. In the emergency room waiting area, Kayana paced nervously. She had called Dr. Reynolds, who had arrived looking annoyed and dismissive. But then a different doctor had come out looking for family members. "I'm his housekeeper," Kayana had explained. "There's no family here." The doctor had hesitated but then shared that they were running tests and that Mr. Winters was stable for now. Hours passed. Kayana called Tanya to explain she wouldn't make it to their planned lunch. As evening approached, Dr. Reynolds emerged from the examination area, his face ashen. "Miss Ellis," he said, his arrogant tone gone. "Mr. Winters is asking for you." Kayana followed him through the double doors to a private room where Nate lay connected to various monitors. He looked smaller somehow, vulnerable in the hospital gown. "Kayana," he said when he saw her, using her first name for the first time. "They found something." Dr. Reynolds cleared his throat. "Mr. Winters has a rare condition called cardiac amyloidosis. It's a buildup of abnormal proteins in the heart that affects its ability to function properly." "Is it serious?" Kayana asked, though she already knew the answer from the doctor's face. "Very," Dr. Reynolds admitted. "If left untreated, it could have been fatal within weeks." Nate's eyes found Kayana's. "You were right," he said softly. "You saw what the so-called expert missed." Dr. Reynolds looked like he wanted to object, but remained silent. "What happens now?" Kayana asked. "We start treatment immediately," the doctor explained. "It's going to be a difficult road, but catching it now gives us a fighting chance." After the doctor left, an uncomfortable silence filled the room. Finally, Nate spoke. Why did you push so hard? You could have just done your job and gone home. Kayana thought about her mother, about all the times people had ignored her concerns. Because that's not who I am, she said simply. And I don't think you would have done any different in my place. A ghost of a smile touched Nate's lips. You don't know me very well, then. Maybe not, she agreed. But I'd like to. The words slipped out before she could stop them, and Kayana felt heat rise to her cheeks. What was she saying? He was her employer, a rich man from another world. But as Nate's hand reached for hers across the hospital bed, something told her that everything was about to change. The wall he had built around himself had cracked, and through that crack, Kayana had glimpsed something no one else had seen in a very long time, his heart. Thank you, he whispered, his fingers tightening around hers, for seeing what no one else did. And in that moment, as the hospital machines beeped steadily around them, Kayana knew that whatever came next, nothing would ever be the same again. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of hospital rooms, medical tests, and worried phone calls. Kayana divided her time between maintaining Nate's penthouse and visiting him at the hospital. She hadn't been asked to do this. It wasn't in her job description, but something pulled her back to his side day after day. You don't have to keep coming, Nate told her one afternoon as she arranged fresh flowers by his hospital bed. The treatment had already begun to take a toll on him. His face was thinner, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. I know, Kayana replied simply. Then why do you? She paused, considering her answer. Because nobody should go through this alone. Nate looked away, his jaw tightening. I'm used to being alone. That doesn't mean you should be, Kayana said softly. A nurse entered then, interrupting their conversation to check Nate's vitals. Kayana used the opportunity to step out into the hallway and call her sister. How's the boss man doing? Tanya asked. Better, I think. The doctors say they caught it just in time. And how are you doing? There was concern in Tanya's voice. You've been running yourself ragged between the penthouse and the hospital. Kayana sighed. I'm fine. Just tired. Be careful, Kai, her sister warned. Remember what happened to Mom. She gave everything to those families she worked for, and in the end. This is different, Kayana interrupted. I'm just doing my job. Is that all it is? Tanya asked pointedly. Kayana didn't answer. She wasn't ready to examine why she felt so drawn to Nate, why his recovery mattered so much to her. When she returned to Nate's room, she found him sitting up in bed, looking at his phone with a frown. Problem? She asked. My board of directors, he said, setting the phone down. They're getting nervous about how long I'll be out of commission. My CFO, Martin, has been pushing for temporary leadership changes. Can they do that? They can try. There was a flash of the old, confident Nate in his eyes. But I built that company from nothing. They won't push me out that easily. Kayana nodded and began gathering her things to leave. I should get back to the penthouse. I need to finish the laundry and... Wait, Nate said, reaching for her hand. The gesture surprised them both. Tell me something about yourself, Kayana. We've known each other for months, and all I know is that you're stubborn enough to save my life. A small smile touched her lips. What do you want to know? Anything, everything. Why did you become a housekeeper? What did you want to be when you were a kid? Kayana sat back down, somewhat uncomfortable with the sudden personal attention. My mother was a caregiver her whole life. I grew up helping her, learning from her. I guess it just seemed natural to follow in her footsteps. But is it what you wanted? The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her that in a long time. I wanted to be a nurse, actually. I even started nursing school, but then my mom got sick and the medical bills. She trailed off. Well, dreams sometimes have to wait. Nate watched her face carefully. Your mother passed away? Kayana nodded. 3 years ago. Heart attack. That's why I noticed your symptoms. I saw the same things in her, but no one listened then either. Understanding dawned in Nate's eyes. That's why you pushed so hard. I couldn't watch it happen again, she admitted. Not when I could do something about it. For a moment, they sat in silence, a new understanding forming between them. Thank you, Nate said finally. Not just for saving my life, but for caring enough to risk your job to do it. Kayana felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. For the first time, he was seeing her, really seeing her, not just as the help, but as a person. 3 days later, Nate was discharged from the hospital with strict instructions for rest and medication. When the car dropped them off at the penthouse, Kayana immediately went into caregiver mode, helping him to the couch and arranging his medications on the coffee table. "You need to take these every 4 hours," she explained. "And the doctor said you should avoid stress and take it easy for at least a month." Nate watched her bustling around with an amused expression. "You missed your calling. You would have made an excellent nurse." "Still might someday," she said with a small shrug. "It's never too late, right?" "No," he agreed. "It's never too late." That evening, as Kayana prepared a light dinner that adhered to Nate's new dietary restrictions, he appeared in the kitchen doorway, leaning against the frame for support. "You shouldn't be up," she scolded gently. "The doctor said." "I know what the doctor said," he interrupted, "but I need to talk to you about something important." Kayana put down the knife she was using to chop vegetables and turned to face him. "What is it?" "I don't want you to be my housekeeper anymore." Her heart sank. Despite everything, he was firing her. She had overstepped after all. "I understand," she said stiffly, trying to hide her disappointment. "I'll pack my things and—" "No," Nate cut her off. "That's not what I mean. I don't want you to be my housekeeper because I want you to be my home health aide instead. Officially, with better pay, benefits, and regular hours." Kayana stared at him, speechless, and he continued, "If you want, I'll pay for you to finish nursing school. Part-time, so you can still work here if you choose to." "Why would you do that?" she asked, finding her voice at last. Nate stepped closer. "Because you saved my life. Because you saw me when no one else did. And because I think it's time someone invested in your dreams for a change." Tears pricked at Kayana's eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Nate replied simply. "Say you'll stay." Kayana thought about her mother, about the promise she'd made never to give her life away, caring for people who saw her as nothing but a servant. But this felt different. Nate wasn't asking her to serve him. He was offering her a chance at the future she'd always wanted. "Yes," she said finally. "I'll stay." The following weeks brought a new routine to the penthouse. Kayana continued to cook and clean, but now she also monitored Nate's health, accompanied him to doctor's appointments, and spent evenings talking with him instead of retreating to her room. One night, as they sat in the living room after dinner, Nate asked about her family. "Tell me about your brother and sister. You mention them sometimes." Kayana smiled. "Tanya's the oldest. She's a force of nature, single mom with 2 kids, works 2 jobs, and still finds time to check on me every day. And Marcus is the baby of the family. He's in his 2nd year of college, studying computer science." "You're helping to pay for his education," Nate observed. It wasn't a question. "We all pitch in. Family takes care of family." Nate was quiet for a moment. "I don't have that. Not anymore." "No parents?" "Siblings?" Kayana asked gently. "My parents died in a car crash when I was in college. I was an only child. After that, it was just me and my ambition." A shadow passed over his face. "And my ex-wife for a while." Kayana had wondered about the divorce, but had never felt it was her place to ask. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Sylvia and I—" It wasn't real. Not on her part, anyway. The bitterness in his voice was palpable. "She wanted my money and my connections. When the scandal hit and my reputation took a nosedive, she was gone within weeks." "That must have been painful," Kayana said, thinking how lonely he must have been, facing public humiliation and private betrayal all at once. "The worst part wasn't losing her," Nate admitted. "It was realizing that I'd never really had her to begin with. That what I thought was love was just a transaction." Kayana didn't know how to respond to such raw honesty. Finally, she said, "Not all relationships are like that. Maybe not for normal people," Nate said with a wry smile. "But when you have money and power, it's hard to know if someone wants you or what you can give them." Their conversation was interrupted by the ringing of Nate's phone. He checked the screen and frowned. "It's Martin, my CFO. I should take this." Kayana nodded and stood to leave, but Nate gestured for her to stay as he answered the call. She tried not to listen to the conversation, but it was clear from Nate's tone that something was wrong. "What do you mean, emergency board meeting?" he demanded. "Without my knowledge or approval?" He listened for a moment, his face darkening. "That's not going to happen, Martin. I'll be there tomorrow. In person." When he hung up, Kayana could see the tension in his body. "What's wrong?" "They're trying to push me out," Nate said, anger lacing his words. "Martin has convinced half the board that I'm too sick to lead the company." "But you're recovering," Kayana protested. "The doctor said you're doing better than expected." "This isn't about my health," Nate said grimly. "It's about power. They think I'm vulnerable right now, so they're making their move." "What are you going to do?" "Fight back," he said, standing up with determination. "I need to get ready for tomorrow. I'm going to that board meeting." Kayana frowned. "The doctor said to avoid stress." "A board meeting sounds pretty stressful to me." "I don't have a choice," Nate insisted. "If I don't show up, I might as well hand over my company." Kayana watched as he paced the room, worry gnawing at her. He was still recovering, still vulnerable. But she also understood that his company meant everything to him. "Then I'm coming with you," she decided. Nate turned to her in surprise. "What?" "I'm coming with you," she repeated firmly. "To monitor your health and make sure you don't overdo it. That's my job now, remember?" A slow smile spread across Nate's face. "You're something else, Kayana Ellis." The next morning, they arrived at Winter's Tech headquarters together. Kayana felt out of place in the sleek, modern building with its glass and steel architecture. Employees in expensive suits gave her curious looks as she followed Nate to the elevator. "Ignore them," Nate said quietly, noticing her discomfort. "You have more right to be here than most of them." The boardroom was already full when they entered. 10 men and women in business attire sat around a long table, their conversations halting abruptly when they saw Nate. Nathaniel, a silver-haired man at the far end of the table, said, rising to his feet, "We weren't expecting you to join us in person." "Clearly, Martin," Nate replied coolly, "since you conveniently forgot to inform me about this meeting." Martin's gaze shifted to Kayana. "And who is this?" "This is Kayana Ellis, my health aide," Nate said, placing a subtle emphasis on her role. "Given your apparent concern for my well-being, I'm sure you don't mind her presence." Without waiting for a response, Nate took his seat at the head of the table, gesturing for Kayana to sit in a chair against the wall behind him. "Now," Nate said, his voice commanding the room, "I understand there's some confusion about my ability to lead this company." For the next hour, Kayana watched as Nate methodically addressed concerns, presented recovery timelines from his doctors, and outlined his plans for the company's future. He was masterful, his voice never wavering, his arguments clear and compelling. But Kayana could see the toll it was taking on him, the slight tremor in his hands, the beads of sweat on his forehead, the way he occasionally pressed his hand against his chest when he thought no one was looking. When Martin began questioning the company's direction since the scandal, Kayana saw Nate's face tighten with pain. She slipped him a glass of water and discreetly handed him one of his pills. The brief look of gratitude he gave her made her heart skip a beat. By the end of the meeting, the board had voted to maintain Nate's position as CEO, with the understanding that he would gradually return to full-time work over the next month. As the board members filed out, Martin lingered. "This isn't over, Nathaniel," he said in a low voice. "Your health issues have made the shareholders nervous, and there are still questions about the financial discrepancies that caused the scandal in the first place. Questions that were answered during the investigation," Nate replied evenly. "Unless you have new information, Martin." Something flickered in Martin's eyes before he turned and left without another word. In the car on the way back to the penthouse, Nate collapsed against the seat, exhaustion etched on his face. "You push yourself too hard," Kayana scolded gently, checking his pulse. "Had to be done," he murmured, his eyes closed. "They needed to see I wasn't beaten." "Well, you certainly showed them that," she said, smiling despite her concern. "You were incredible in there." Nate opened his eyes and looked at her. "I couldn't have done it without you. All I did was sit there and worry about you," Kayana protested. "No," Nate said, taking her hand. "You gave me strength just by being there, by believing in me." The intensity of his gaze made Kayana's breath catch. There was something new in the way he was looking at her, something that made her heart race and her skin tingle. "Nate," she began, not even realizing she'd used his first name. "I mean it, Kayana," he said softly. "These past few weeks, you've changed everything for me." Before she could respond, his phone rang again. He checked it and groaned. "It's my lawyer. I need to take this." Kayana nodded, feeling both relieved and disappointed by the interruption. What had she been about to say? What was happening between them? That evening, Nate was unusually quiet during dinner. He seemed lost in thought, responding to Kayana's questions with distracted one-word answers. "Is everything okay?" she finally asked. "Was it something your lawyer said?" Nate looked up from his barely touched food. "It's nothing you need to worry about. If it affects your health, then it is something I need to worry about," she insisted. Nate sighed. "My ex-wife's lawyers are asking for additional financial documents related to the scandal. It's just bringing up bad memories." Kayana hesitated, then asked a question that had been on her mind for months. "What exactly happened with the scandal? I only know what was in the news." For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he pushed his plate away and looked directly at her. "The official story is that I misappropriated company funds for personal use," he said. "That I took money from our charitable foundation and used it to buy properties and assets that weren't disclosed to the board or shareholders." "And the real story?" Kayana asked quietly. Nate's jaw tightened. "It's complicated. I'm a pretty smart woman, Nate. I think I can keep up." A small smile touched his lips at her confidence. "Yes, you are." He took a deep breath. "The truth is, I did move those funds, but not for myself." Kayana waited, sensing there was more he needed to say. "The money went to a private account that was used to purchase those properties, but I wasn't the one who made those purchases or used that account." He paused. "It was Sylvia, my ex-wife." Kayana's eyes widened. "Your wife stole from your company." "She had access to my personal accounts and passwords. She used them to transfer the money and make it look like I was the one doing it." His voice was flat, emotionless. "By the time I discovered what was happening, the damage was done. The board was informed, an investigation was launched, and the press got hold of the story." "But why didn't you tell the truth? Clear your name." Nate's laugh was bitter. "Because I loved her. Because I was a fool who thought that if I protected her, she would stay." He shook his head. "Instead, she filed for divorce as soon as the scandal broke, claiming she couldn't be married to someone who would betray their company and shareholders." "That's horrible," Kayana said, anger rising in her at the injustice of it all. "She let you take the fall for something she did, and then abandoned you?" "She knew exactly what she was doing," Nate said. "The divorce settlement was quick because I didn't fight it. I just wanted it over with. I gave her half of everything I had built, which was exactly what she wanted all along." Kayana reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm so sorry, Nate." He looked down at their joined hands. "The worst part is that I still have all her emails, the ones that prove what she did. I've kept them all this time, telling myself it was for protection, but the truth is, I couldn't let go." "You still love her," Kayana said softly, trying to ignore the pang in her heart. "No," Nate said firmly. "I don't love her. I don't think I ever really knew her to love her. But letting go of the past, it's not that simple." Kayana nodded and gently withdrew her hand. "I understand." But as she cleared the dishes and Nate retreated to his office, she wondered if she really did understand. How could someone as successful and confident as Nate allow himself to be so thoroughly deceived? And why was he still protecting his ex-wife after everything she'd done to him? Later that night, as Kayana was preparing for bed, there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find Nate standing there, looking uncertain. "I'm sorry about dinner," he said. "I didn't mean to dump all of that on you." "Don't apologize," Kayana replied. "I asked. Still, it's not your burden to carry. That's what friends do, Nate. They help carry each other's burdens." He looked at her with surprise. "Is that what we are? Friends?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with unspoken possibilities. "I like to think so," Kayana said carefully. Nate took a step closer. "What if I want us to be more than friends?" Kayana's heart pounded in her chest. This was dangerous territory. He was her employer, still recovering, still vulnerable. And she had promised herself she wouldn't repeat her mother's mistakes. "Nate, I know it's complicated," he interrupted. "I know there are 1,000 reasons why this is a bad idea. But when I'm with you, I feel alive again. You see me, not my money or my company or what I can do for you. Just me." Kayana wanted to reach for him, to close the distance between them, but fear held her back. "What happens when you're fully recovered? When you don't need me anymore?" "I'll always need you," he said softly. "Not as my health aide or my housekeeper, but as the woman who saved more than just my life. You saved my heart, Kayana." He reached out, his fingers gently brushing her cheek. Kayana closed her eyes, leaning into his touch despite all the warning bells sounding in her mind. "I'm scared," she admitted. "This isn't part of the plan." "I know," Nate whispered. "I'm scared too." When she opened her eyes, he was so close she could feel his breath on her face. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath with them. Then Nate's phone rang, shattering the moment. He stepped back with a frustrated sigh and checked the screen. "It's Martin again," he said. "I should take it." Kayana nodded, trying to compose herself. "Of course. Good night, Nate." "Kayana, we can talk tomorrow," she said quickly, needing space to think, to breathe. "Good night." She gently closed the door, then leaned against it, her heart racing. What was she doing? Getting involved with Nate would complicate everything. She could lose her job, her professional boundaries, maybe even her heart. On the other side of the door, she heard Nate answer his phone, his voice tense. "What is it now, Martin?" Kayana moved away from the door, not wanting to eavesdrop. But as she got ready for bed, she couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had shifted between them tonight. Something that couldn't be undone. And somewhere deep inside, beneath all the fear and doubt, a small voice whispered that maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop running from love. Even if it came in the most unexpected package. What she didn't know was that across town, in a luxurious hotel suite, a woman was making plans that would threaten everything Kayana and Nate were building together. Sylvia Winters had seen the news about her ex-husband's health crisis, and like a shark smelling blood in the water, she sensed an opportunity to return to the life of wealth and privilege she believed she deserved. "He's vulnerable now," she murmured to herself as she scrolled through news articles about Nate's company. And Nathaniel always did have a soft heart beneath that cold exterior. With a smile that didn't reach her eyes, Sylvia picked up her phone and made a call. "Martin, it's me. I think it's time we move forward with our plan. Nathaniel is weaker than ever, and I heard he's got some girl playing nurse now. The timing couldn't be better." As she hung up, Sylvia gazed out at the city lights, already imagining herself back in the penthouse, back in control of the fortune she believed should have been hers all along. What she didn't count on was Kayana Ellis, a woman who could see past facades to the truth of what lay in people's hearts. The morning after their almost kiss, Kayana busied herself with breakfast preparations, trying to act normal. When Nate entered the kitchen, there was an awkwardness between them that hadn't been there before. "Good morning," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "How are you feeling today?" "Better," he replied, watching her carefully. "About last night?" "Your eggs are getting cold," she interrupted, placing a plate in front of him. "And don't forget to take your medication." Nate sighed but didn't push. "I have another board meeting this afternoon. Nothing urgent, just quarterly updates. Should I come with you?" Kayana asked, finally looking at him. "I'd like that," he said softly. Their eyes met, and the tension between them shifted from awkward to something else entirely. Kayana was the first to look away. "I'll be ready at 1 then," she said, turning back to the stove. Before Nate could respond, the penthouse elevator chimed, indicating an arrival. They both looked toward the entrance in surprise. No one was expected this morning. "Were you waiting for someone?" Kayana asked. Nate shook his head, standing up. "No." The sound of high heels clicking on marble echoed through the penthouse, and then a woman appeared in the kitchen doorway. She was stunning, tall and slender, with perfect blonde hair and a designer outfit that probably cost more than Kayana made in 3 months. "Hello, Nathaniel," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "Aren't you going to welcome me home?" Nate's face drained of color. "Sylvia, what are you doing here?" Sylvia Winters' eyes drifted to Kayana, taking in her simple clothes with a dismissive glance before turning back to Nate. "I heard about your health scare. I've been so worried about you." She stepped forward as if to embrace him, but Nate took a step back. "How did you get up here? Your access should have been revoked." Sylvia smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "The doorman remembers me, darling. I told him I wanted to surprise you." She looked around the kitchen. And who is this? A new cook. Kayana felt her cheeks burn at the deliberate misunderstanding. This is Kayana Ellis, Nate said firmly. My health aide and friend. Kayana, this is Sylvia, my ex-wife. Ex for now, Sylvia said with a light laugh. But we all make mistakes, don't we, Nathaniel? Kayana could see the tension in Nate's body, the way his hand gripped the counter for support. I should give you two some privacy, she said, moving to leave. No, Nate said quickly. Stay. He turned to Sylvia. Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of Kayana. Sylvia's perfect smile faltered for just a moment. Always so dramatic, Nathaniel. I simply came to check on you. When I heard about your heart condition, I was devastated. We may not be together anymore, but I still care about you. That's funny, Nate said coldly. You didn't seem to care much when you emptied our accounts and let me take the blame for your fraud. Sylvia's eyes hardened, though her smile remained fixed. Ancient history, darling. We both made mistakes. But now that you're unwell, I thought perhaps it was time to put the past behind us. What? Nate demanded. What do you really want, Sylvia? She moved closer to him, placing a manicured hand on his arm. Is it so hard to believe that I might have regrets? That I might have realized what I lost? Kayana watched as Nate's face softened slightly. Despite everything this woman had done to him, part of him still wanted to believe her. Kayana felt a knot form in her stomach. I have a doctor's appointment, she said abruptly. I should go get ready. This time, Nate didn't stop her as she left the kitchen. In her room, Kayana tried to calm her racing heart. She had no right to feel jealous or threatened. Nate wasn't hers. He was her employer, her patient, nothing more. But as she changed clothes, she couldn't help but hear Sylvia's voice, low and intimate, floating down the hallway. She was telling Nate how sorry she was, how much she had changed, how she'd been getting therapy to understand why she'd behaved so badly. I was scared, Nathaniel, Sylvia was saying. Scared of how much I loved you. Scared of not being enough for you. So I tried to secure my future the only way I knew how. It was wrong, I know that now. Kayana didn't hear Nate's response. But when she emerged from her room 20 minutes later, Sylvia was sitting on the couch beside him, their heads close together as they looked at something on her phone. Kayana, Nate called when he saw her. Sylvia was just showing me pictures from the charity gala last month, the one that benefits heart research. Sylvia smiled up at Kayana, all charm on the surface. I've been a major donor since Nathaniel's diagnosis. It seemed like the least I could do. How thoughtful, Kayana replied, keeping her tone neutral. Nate, we should leave soon if we want to make your board meeting. Board meeting? Sylvia asked, her eyebrows raising slightly. You're back at work already? Nathaniel, is that wise in your condition? I'm fine, Nate assured her. Kayana, make sure I don't overdo it. Well, isn't that sweet, Sylvia said, standing gracefully. Perhaps I could come along? For old time's sake? I still know most of the board members, after all. Nate hesitated, and Kayana held her breath. After a moment, he nodded. If you'd like. Wonderful. Sylvia clapped her hands together. I'll just freshen up. I assume my old bathroom still has all my things. As she disappeared down the hallway, Kayana turned to Nate with disbelief. You kept her things? After everything she did, Nate looked uncomfortable. I never got around to clearing them out. It didn't seem important. And you believe all this? Kayana gestured in the direction Sylvia had gone. The charity donations, the therapy, the regret. I don't know what I believe, Nate admitted. But I've known Sylvia for a long time. She's not entirely bad. She stole from you, Kayana reminded him. She framed you for her crimes and left you to face the scandal alone. People can change, Nate said defensively. Kayana shook her head. Be careful, Nate. That's all I'm saying. In the car on the way to Winter's tech headquarters, Sylvia dominated the conversation, reminiscing about board meetings past and asking Nate detailed questions about the company's current projects. She barely acknowledged Kayana's presence, speaking to Nate as if they were alone. When they arrived, Sylvia slipped her arm through Nate's as they walked through the lobby. Just like old times, she said with a dazzling smile. Kayana trailed behind them, feeling increasingly out of place. In the boardroom, Sylvia was greeted warmly by most of the board members. She took a seat right next to Nate at the head of the table, leaving Kayana to sit in the same chair against the wall she had occupied at the previous meeting. Martin, the CFO, seemed particularly pleased to see Sylvia. "What a lovely surprise," he said, taking the seat on her other side. "I had no idea you were back in town." "Just visiting," Sylvia replied with a smile. "But when Nathaniel mentioned today's meeting, I couldn't resist tagging along. I missed all of you." Throughout the meeting, Kayana watched as Sylvia charmed everyone in the room. She laughed at the right moments, asked insightful questions, and occasionally placed her hand on Nate's arm in a gesture that seemed both possessive and supportive. When Martin presented the quarterly financials, Sylvia leaned forward with interest. "These numbers are impressive, especially given the difficulties of the past year," she said, her eyes flickering to Nate. "You've done an amazing job of recovery, darling." Several board members nodded in agreement, and Nate smiled at the praise. Only Kayana noticed how Martin and Sylvia exchanged a brief, meaningful glance. After the meeting, as they mingled with coffee and pastries, Kayana approached Nate. "How are you feeling? Do you need to take your medication?" Before Nate could answer, Sylvia appeared at his side with a glass of water and his pill case. "Already taken care of," she said smoothly. "I remember all your medication schedules, Nathaniel." "Thank you," Nate said, looking surprised but pleased. Kayana stepped back, feeling useless and invisible. This was Sylvia's world: board meetings and business talk and expensive clothes. What had she been thinking, imagining there could ever be anything real between her and Nate? As they were preparing to leave, Martin approached them. "Sylvia, it's been too long. Perhaps we could catch up over dinner one evening." "That would be lovely," Sylvia replied. "I'm staying at the Four Seasons for now, but who knows? If things go well, I might be moving back soon." She squeezed Nate's arm as she said this. Nate didn't contradict her, and Kayana felt her heart sink even further. Back at the penthouse, Sylvia made herself comfortable, kicking off her heels and curling up on the couch. "Let me make dinner tonight," she suggested. "I remember how much you love my cocoa vin, Nathaniel." "You don't have to do that," Kayana said quickly. "I've already planned a meal that fits with Nate's dietary restrictions." Sylvia waved a dismissive hand. "I'm sure whatever you had planned was very nutritious. But Nathaniel deserves a real meal, doesn't he? Besides, I checked with his doctor this afternoon, and he said a little indulgence now and then is fine." "You call my doctor?" Nate asked, looking surprised. "Of course, darling. I wanted to make sure I had all the information about your condition." Sylvia stood and headed for the kitchen. "Now, where do you keep the wine these days? A good Coke au vin needs a decent Burgundy." As Sylvia busied herself in the kitchen, Nate turned to Kayana with an apologetic expression. "She means well," he said quietly. "Does she?" Kayana replied, unable to keep the doubt from her voice. "Nate, don't you think it's strange that she suddenly shows up right when you're vulnerable? Right when your company is finally recovering from the scandal she caused?" A flash of irritation crossed Nate's face. "You don't know her, Kayana, and you don't know our history." "I know what you told me," Kayana said, hurt by his tone. "I know she betrayed you in the worst possible way." "It's complicated," Nate insisted. "People make mistakes. Some mistakes are too big to forgive," Kayana said softly. Before Nate could respond, Sylvia called from the kitchen. "Nathaniel, darling, could you help me find a good saucepans? Your little maid seems to have rearranged everything." Nate gave Kayana an apologetic look before joining Sylvia in the kitchen. Kayana stood alone in the living room, feeling like an outsider in what had, until this morning, felt like her home too. That night, after a dinner where Sylvia dominated the conversation with stories about her and Nate's past, Kayana retreated to her room early. She sat on her bed, trying to sort through her jumbled emotions. Maybe this was for the best. She had been getting too close, forgetting the boundaries between employer and employee, patient and caregiver. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Nate standing there, looking troubled. "Can I come in?" he asked. Kayana hesitated, then stepped aside to let him enter. Her room was small and simple compared to the rest of the penthouse, but it was hers, or had been until today. "I wanted to apologize," Nate said, sitting on the edge of her bed. for Sylvia's behavior. She can be overwhelming. You don't need to apologize for her, Kayana said, leaning against the closed door. She's not your responsibility anymore. I know, but Nate ran a hand through his hair. I feel like I've disappointed you somehow. Kayana crossed her arms, trying to maintain some emotional distance. It's not my place to be disappointed, Nate. What you do with your ex-wife is your business. But it affects you too, he insisted, especially after what happened, or almost happened, between us last night. Nothing happened, Kayana said quickly. But it could have, Nate replied, his eyes meeting hers. If my phone hadn't rung, I would have kissed you, Kayana, and I think you would have let me. The directness of his words made her breath catch. It would have been a mistake, she said, though her heart wasn't in it. Would it? Nate stood and moved closer to her. Because it's the only thing I've been able to think about all day. Even with Sylvia here, Kayana couldn't help asking. Especially with Sylvia here, Nate said softly. Seeing her again has made one thing very clear to me. Whatever I felt for her is long gone. But what I feel for you, he reached out to touch her cheek. That's very real and very present. Kayana wanted to believe him, wanted to lean into his touch and forget everything else. But doubt still nagged at her. Then why is she staying here? She asked. Why are you letting her back into your life? Nate dropped his hand with a sigh. It's not that simple. Sylvia and I have history, complicated history. And there are things about the scandal, about what really happened, that only she and I know. The emails, Kayana remembered. You said you kept all her emails, the ones that prove what she did. A shadow crossed Nate's face. Yes. Where are they? Kayana asked, a sudden suspicion forming. In a secured folder on my personal server, Nate replied. Why? Have you checked them recently? Made sure they're still there. Nate frowned. No, I haven't had reason to. Why would you ask that? Because Sylvia didn't just randomly decide to visit you, Kayana said urgently. She wants something, Nate, and I'm willing to bet it has to do with those emails. The doubt in Nate's eyes was replaced by concern. Without another word, he turned and left her room, heading straight for his home office. Kayana followed close behind. In his office, Nate sat at his desk and quickly logged into his computer. His fingers flew over the keyboard as he navigated through folders and security prompts. Finally, he sat back in his chair with a frown. Well, Kayana asked from the doorway. They're still there, he said, sounding almost disappointed. All of them, untouched. Kayana moved to stand behind him, looking at the screen where dozens of email files were displayed. Maybe she doesn't know where you keep them, she suggested. Maybe, Nate said, but he didn't sound convinced. Or maybe you're wrong about her motives. Before Kayana could respond, Sylvia's voice came from behind them. Wrong about whose motives? They both turned to see her standing in the doorway, wrapped in a silk robe that Kayana assumed had been left from her time living in the penthouse. Sylvia, Nate said, quickly closing the files on his screen. I thought you were taking a bath. I was, she said, moving into the room with feline grace. But then I heard voices and got curious. Her eyes moved to the computer screen, now showing only Nate's desktop. Working late. Just checking some emails, Nate said casually. Sylvia smiled, but there was a calculation in her eyes that made Kayana uneasy. Always the workaholic, she said fondly. That's one thing that hasn't changed about you, Nathaniel. She glided over to stand beside his chair, resting a hand on his shoulder. But you need to be careful now with your heart condition. Too much stress isn't good for you. She looked at Kayana. Shouldn't you be making sure he rests properly? That is your job, isn't it? The condescension in her tone was unmistakable. Nate knows his limits, Kayana replied evenly. And yes, making sure he stays healthy is exactly my job. Well, you can take the night off, Sylvia said with a wave of her hand. I'll make sure he gets to bed at a reasonable hour. Just like old times, right, darling? The possessive way she squeezed Nate's shoulder made Kayana's stomach turn. But it wasn't her place to object. Not if Nate himself didn't. To her disappointment, Nate remained silent, his expression unreadable. After an awkward moment, Kayana nodded stiffly. Good night, then. As she turned to leave, she heard Sylvia's voice, soft and seductive. Now, What shall we do with the rest of our evening, Nathaniel? I have so many ideas. Kayana closed the office door behind her, her heart heavy with a mixture of hurt and worry. Whatever game Sylvia was playing, it was clear she knew exactly what she was doing. And for some reason, Nate was letting her do it. Back in her room, Kayana couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the emails, about Sylvia's sudden reappearance, about the look that had passed between Sylvia and Martin at the board meeting. There was something happening that she couldn't quite piece together, but her instincts were screaming that Nate was in danger, not just physically, but in every way that mattered. Around midnight, she heard voices in the hallway. Nate and Sylvia saying goodnight. There was a pause, and then the sound of a door closing. One door, not two. Kayana squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the image of them together. It wasn't her business. It wasn't her place to care. Nate was a grown man who could make his own decisions, even bad ones. But as she lay awake in the darkness, Kayana knew she was already in too deep. Somehow, without meaning to, she had fallen for Nathaniel Winters. And now she had to watch as he potentially made the biggest mistake of his life by letting Sylvia back in. The next morning, Kayana was up early, determined to maintain her professional demeanor no matter what. She was surprised to find Nate already in the kitchen, alone, making coffee. "Good morning," she said cautiously, trying to gauge his mood. "Morning," he replied, not quite meeting her eyes. "Sleep well?" "Not really," she admitted. "You?" "No." He handed her a cup of coffee. "Sylvia's still asleep." In the guest room, he added pointedly. Relief flooded through Kayana, though she tried not to show it. "I see. I thought about what you said," Nate continued, lowering his voice, "about her motives for being here, and I think you might be right." Kayana looked up in surprise. "What happened?" She asked about the company financials last night, about how I've been managing the recovery from the scandal. And then she suggested that maybe it was time to put the past behind us completely. Meaning delete the emails, destroy any evidence of what she did, Nate said grimly. She didn't say it directly, but that was the implication. "And what did you tell her?" Kayana asked, holding her breath. "I said I'd think about it," Nate replied. "I wanted to see what she'd do next." Before they could discuss it further, Nate's phone rang. He checked the screen and frowned. "It's Martin again. He's been calling a lot lately." As Nate answered the call, Kayana watched his face carefully. She saw the exact moment when concern turned to alarm. "What do you mean, emergency shareholders meeting?" Nate demanded. "On what grounds?" He listened for a moment, his knuckles white around the phone. "That's impossible. Those records are sealed. Unless..." His eyes darted to the hallway leading to the guest room. "I'll be there in an hour." He hung up, his face pale with anger. "Someone accessed the sealed court record from the scandal investigation," he told Kayana. "Records that show the transfers came from my accounts, but not the emails that prove it was Sylvia using my passwords." "She's making a move against you," Kayana realized. "Using the scandal to try to push you out while you're vulnerable." With Martin's help, Nate added, "I need to get to that meeting." Now, as if on cue, Sylvia appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking immaculate in a designer outfit, her hair and makeup perfect despite the early hour. "Going somewhere, darling?" she asked, her voice innocent but her eyes sharp. "You know exactly where I'm going," Nate said coldly. "The question is, how long have you and Martin been planning this?" Sylvia's facade dropped for just a moment, revealing the calculating woman beneath. Then she smiled again, but this time there was no pretense of warmth. "You always were too smart for your own good, Nathaniel," she said, "but not smart enough to see what was right in front of you." "It won't work," Nate told her. "I still have the emails, Sylvia. I can prove what you did." "Can you?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Are you sure about that?" A chill ran down Kayana's spine at the confidence in Sylvia's voice. Nate must have felt it too, because he immediately turned and strode back to his office, Kayana right behind him. When he logged into his computer and navigated to the secure folder, his face went pale. "They're gone," he whispered. "All of them. Deleted. But how?" Kayana asked. "You checked last night." They were there. Sylvia appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with a triumphant smile. "You really should change your passwords more often, Nathaniel." especially after a divorce. You broke into my computer? Nate's voice was dangerously quiet. Let's call it tying up loose ends, Sylvia replied. The board already thinks you're too sick to lead the company. Now, they'll have reason to believe the original scandal was exactly what it appeared to be. You misappropriating funds, and with no evidence to the contrary. What? Nate demanded. You already took half of everything in the divorce. What more do you want? Half isn't enough, Sylvia said simply. Not when I can have it all. The company's stock has rebounded nicely since the scandal. Once you're out, and Martin takes over as CEO, with me as a special advisor, of course, we'll do quite well for ourselves. You won't get away with this, Kayana said, stepping forward. Nate will fight you. Sylvia looked at her with amusement. The maid speaks. How charming. She turned back to Nate. You can fight if you want to, Nathaniel. But remember your heart condition. Is a company really worth dying for? With those parting words, she turned and sauntered out of the office. A moment later, they heard the elevator doors open and close. Nate sat heavily in his chair, his face ashen. She's right, he said quietly. Without those emails, it's my word against hers. And with my health issues, we'll find a way, Kayana insisted, kneeling beside his chair. There has to be evidence somewhere else, something she missed. Nate looked at her, and the defeat in his eyes broke her heart. Why do you still believe in me? He asked. After all this, after seeing how easily I let her manipulate me again? Because I know who you really are, Kayana said, taking his hand. Not the CEO, not the rich man, not the ex-husband who made mistakes. I know your heart, Nate, and it's worth fighting for. For a long moment, he just looked at her, as if seeing her truly for the first time. Then he squeezed her hand and straightened in his chair. You're right, he said, a new determination in his voice. This isn't over. Sylvia may have deleted the emails from my server, but she doesn't know everything about me. He turned to his computer and began typing rapidly. I keep backups. Backups of backups. Actually, paranoia is an occupational hazard in the tech world. Hope flared in Kayana's chest. I mean, Nate said, a smile slowly spreading across his face, that Sylvia just made a very big mistake. She thinks she's won, but the game isn't over yet. Not by a long shot. As they raced to prepare for the shareholders' meeting, neither of them noticed the small envelope that had been slipped under Kayana's door, an envelope containing medical test results from Marcus Ellis, Kayana's younger brother, showing disturbing similarities to the heart condition that had nearly killed Nate. The storm was just beginning, and before it was over, both Kayana and Nate would be forced to decide what and who they were truly willing to fight for. Kayana and Nate arrived at Winter's tech headquarters with barely 15 minutes to spare before the emergency shareholders meeting. The tension in the car had been thick, both of them focused on the battle ahead. Are you sure the backups are intact? Kayana asked as they hurried through the lobby. Positive, Nate replied. I checked them this morning after Sylvia left. Every email, every piece of evidence is there. She thought she was being clever, but she underestimated me. As they approached the boardroom, they could hear voices inside, Sylvia's cultured tones rising above the others, painting a picture of concern and reluctance. I never wanted to bring this up again, she was saying, but as someone who cares deeply about the future of this company, I couldn't stay silent when I discovered that the same financial irregularities were happening again. Nate pushed open the door, and all heads turned toward them. Sylvia stood at the head of the table, looking elegant and concerned, while Martin sat beside her, a satisfied smile on his face. Nathaniel, Sylvia said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. I'm so glad you could make it. We were just discussing some concerning developments. I bet you were, Nate said coldly, striding to the front of the room. Kayana took her usual seat against the wall, but Nate surprised her by gesturing for her to join him at the table. Kayana stays by my side today. The shareholders and board members exchanged curious glances, but no one objected as Kayana took the seat next to Nate. Now, Nate said, addressing the room, I understand there have been allegations made about my role in the financial scandal last year. Allegations that conveniently resurface just as I'm recovering from serious health issue. Martin cleared his throat. Nathaniel, no one is questioning your integrity. But these documents from the sealed investigation clearly show. They show exactly what Sylvia wanted them to show, Nate interrupted. What they don't show is the whole truth. He opened his laptop and connected it to the room's projection system. Before we go any further, there's something all of you need to see. On the large screen at the front of the room, a series of emails appeared. Emails from Sylvia to private accounts, detailing how she had accessed Nate's passwords, how she had transferred company funds without his knowledge, and how she had carefully covered her tracks. Where did you get those? Sylvia demanded, her composure slipping for the first time. Those were deleted. I keep backups, Nate said simply. Multiple backups, in places you couldn't access. Did you really think I wouldn't protect myself after what you did? The room had gone completely silent as the shareholders and board members read the damning evidence on the screen. Martin's face had drained of color, while Sylvia's was flushed with anger. This proves nothing, she insisted. Those emails could be faked. They're not faked, said a quiet voice from the doorway. Everyone turned to see Rebecca Chun, Winter's tech's head of cybersecurity, enter the room. I verified their authenticity myself. The digital signatures and timestamps are genuine. These emails are real. Thank you, Rebecca, Nate said with a nod. I asked Ms. Chun to independently verify all the evidence before this meeting. Sylvia's eyes darted around the room, looking for allies, but found none. The evidence was too clear, too damning. Martin, she said, turning to the CFO. Tell them this is a setup. But Martin was already gathering his things, avoiding eye contact with everyone. I had no idea, he muttered. Sylvia told me that Nathaniel was the one who... Save it, Martin, Nate said firmly. Your resignation letter should be on my desk by the end of the day. As the reality of their situation sank in, Sylvia's demeanor changed completely. The elegant, controlled facade crumbled, revealing the calculating woman beneath. You think you've won? She hissed at Nate. This isn't over. I still have contacts, information that could hurt you in this company. Actually, it is over, Nate replied calmly. Because in addition to exposing your role in the financial scandal, I've also filed charges against you for corporate espionage and fraud. He nodded toward the doorway, where two men in suits had appeared. These gentlemen are from the FBI's white-collar crime division. They'd like to ask you some questions. The shock on Sylvia's face was almost worth all the pain she had caused. As the agents led her and Martin away, the boardroom erupted in chaotic discussion. Shareholders demanded answers. Board members argued about damage control. And through it all, Nate remained calm, answering questions and reassuring everyone that the company was on solid ground. Kiana watched him with pride. This was the real Nathaniel Winters, not the cold, distant man she had first met, nor the vulnerable patient she had nursed back to health, but a leader with integrity and strength. When the meeting finally ended 3 hours later, Nate looked exhausted but triumphant. As the last of the board members filed out, he collapsed into his chair with a deep sigh. You did it, Kiana said, squeezing his hand. You cleared your name. We did it, Nate corrected her. I couldn't have faced this without you, Kiana. Your belief in me gave me the strength to fight back. Their eyes met, and the connection between them felt stronger than ever. But before either could speak, Nate's phone rang. He checked the screen and frowned. It's Dr. Reynolds, he said, answering the call. Yes, doctor. I'm feeling fine. What? No, I haven't been tested for that. Are you sure? I understand. Thank you for letting me know. When he hung up, his expression was troubled. Dr. Reynolds wants me to come in for additional tests. Apparently, there's a genetic component to my heart condition that they want to explore further. Genetic, Kiana repeated, her stomach dropping. The envelope she had found under her door that morning suddenly felt heavy in her pocket. In the rush to deal with Sylvia, she hadn't had time to fully process its contents. Nate, she said slowly, there's something I need to show you. She pulled out the envelope and handed it to him. This was delivered to my room this morning. It's about my brother, Marcus. Nate opened the envelope and scanned the medical report inside. His eyes widened as he realized what he was reading. These symptoms, they're the same as mine. Kiana nodded, fear clutching at her heart. The same condition that nearly killed you might be affecting my brother too. We need to get him tested immediately, Nate said, already reaching for his phone. I'll call Dr. Stevenson. He's the specialist who diagnosed me. He's the best in the field. Nate, wait, Kiana said, placing her hand over his. Marcus is in college. We don't have the kind of insurance that covers specialists like Dr. Stevenson. Understanding dawned in Nate's eyes. Kiana, money is not an issue here. Not when it comes to your brother's life. I can't ask you to do that, she protested weakly. You're not asking. I'm offering. Nate took both her hands in his. You saved my life, Kiana. Let me help save your brother's. Tears filled her eyes at the sincerity in his voice. This wasn't charity or obligation. It was genuine care. Thank you, she whispered. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Marcus was brought in for testing, which confirmed Dr. Reynolds' suspicion. He had the same rare heart condition as Nate, though thankfully in a much earlier stage. Treatment began immediately, with Dr. Stevenson personally overseeing his care. Through it all, Nate remained by Kiana's side, supporting her family in ways she never could have imagined. He arranged for Marcus to continue his studies while receiving treatment, set up a comfortable apartment near the hospital for Tanya and her children to stay in when visiting, and covered all medical expenses without hesitation. One evening, as they sat in the hospital waiting room while Marcus underwent another round of tests, Kiana finally asked the question that had been on her mind. Why are you doing all this, Nate? For my family, for people you barely know. Nate was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. When I was diagnosed, he said finally, I had everything money could buy. A successful company, a penthouse, cars, investments. But I had no one who truly cared whether I lived or died. No one who saw me for who I really was. He took her hand gently. Then you came into my life, and for the first time, I felt seen. Not for my wealth or my position, but for myself. Kiana's heart raced at his words. I just did my job, she said softly. No, Nate said, shaking his head. You did much more than that. You fought for me when no one else would. You believed in me when even I had doubts. He paused, his eyes searching hers. You showed me what real love looks like, Kiana. Not the transactional relationship I had with Sylvia, but something genuine and selfless. Love, Kiana repeated, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. Yes, love, Nate confirmed, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. I love you, Kiana Ellis. And I think I have since the day you stood in my kitchen and told me you wouldn't let me die, even if it cost you your job. Tears spilled down Kiana's cheeks as emotions overwhelmed her. I love you too, she admitted. But I've been so afraid. Afraid of ending up like my mother, giving everything to care for someone and getting nothing in return. Afraid that what I felt for you was just misplaced gratitude or obligation. And now, Nate asked gently, what are you afraid of now? Kiana thought about it, really thought about it. I'm afraid of how much I love you, she said honestly. It's bigger than anything I've ever felt before. Nate smiled, reaching up to wipe away her tears. That's the good kind of fear, he told her. The kind that means something real is at stake. 2 weeks later, with Marcus' condition stabilized and responding well to treatment, Kiana found herself at a crossroads. Nate had asked her to move into the penthouse, not as his health aide or his housekeeper, but as his partner. The offer was tempting, but something held her back. I need time, she told him one evening as they sat on his balcony, watching the sunset. Everything's happened so fast. Your recovery, Sylvia, Marcus' diagnosis. I need to be sure that what we have is real, not just a reaction to all the drama. Though disappointment flickered in his eyes, Nate nodded. I understand. Take all the time you need, Kiana. I'm not going anywhere. True to his word, Nate gave her space. Kiana moved back into her small apartment, returned to working as Nate's health aide on a part-time basis, and started taking nursing classes 3 evenings a week. Classes that Nate insisted on paying for despite her protests. Consider it an investment in both our futures, he'd said. The world needs more nurses like you, who can see what others miss. As weeks turned into months, their relationship deepened in ways that surprised them both. Without the intensity of living together during a crisis, they were able to discover each other in new ways. Simple dinner dates, long walks in the park, quiet evenings watching movies or reading. Nate continued to recover, his heart growing stronger under Kayana's watchful care. His company flourished once the truth about the scandal was fully revealed, with share prices climbing to record highs. Sylvia and Martin both faced criminal charges for their roles in the financial fraud and attempted corporate takeover. And Marcus thrived under Dr. Stevenson's care, his condition improving so much that he was able to return to college for the spring semester, armed with a treatment plan and regular checkups. 6 months after Kayana had moved out of the penthouse, Nate invited her family over for dinner. Tanya came with her children, and Marcus arrived straight from campus, looking healthier than he had in months. "What's the occasion?" Tanya asked as they all sat around Nate's dining table. "No special occasion," Nate replied with a smile. "I just wanted to spend time with the people who matter most to Kayana and to me." The evening was filled with laughter and stories, the kind of warm family gathering that Nate had never experienced in his own life. Kayana watched as he played video games with Tanya's kids, discussed computer science with Marcus, and helped Tanya clear the dishes despite her protests. Later, after her family had left and they were alone, Kayana found Nate on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. "Thank you for tonight," she said, joining him at the railing. "It meant a lot to them. To me. They're amazing people," Nate said sincerely. "Just like their sister." Kayana smiled, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. "I've been doing a lot of thinking these past few months," she said. "About us, about what I want." "And what have you decided?" Nate asked, turning to face her. "That I'm tired of being afraid," Kayana said simply. "Afraid of ending up like my mother. Afraid of losing myself in caring for others. Afraid of trusting someone with my heart." She took his hand. "I want to come home, Nate, if the offer still stands." The joy that lit up his face was answer enough, but he pulled her close anyway. "The offer will always stand, Kayana. Always." As they kissed under the stars, Kayana knew that this was nothing like her mother's story. This was something new, something equal. A partnership built on mutual respect, understanding, and love. 2 weeks later, Kayana moved back into the penthouse. But this time, she didn't take the small room at the end of the hall. This time, she shared Nate's room, his space, his life. Their routines merged seamlessly, Kayana continuing her nursing studies while Nate gradually returned to full-time work at his company. They supported each other's dreams, celebrated each other's victories, and faced challenges together. 3 months after Kayana moved in, Nate proposed. Not with a grand gesture or expensive display, but quietly, on a Sunday morning as they sat in bed drinking coffee and reading the newspaper. "I want to spend the rest of my life with you," he said simply, placing a small velvet box on the breakfast tray between them. "Will you marry me, Kayana?" The ring inside was beautiful but not ostentatious. A perfect balance of elegance and warmth, just like their relationship. "Yes," Kayana answered without hesitation. "Yes, I will." They decided on a small wedding, just family and close friends. The ceremony would be held in the garden of the hospital where they had first truly connected, a symbolic choice that felt right to both of them. The night before the wedding, Kayana's family gathered at Tanya's apartment for a quiet celebration. As they sat around the living room, sharing memories and laughter, Tanya raised her glass in a toast. "To Kayana," she said with a proud smile, "who always knew how to see what was in people's hearts. Mom would be so proud of you." "And to Marcus," Kayana added, raising her own glass to her brother, "for scaring us half to death and then fighting his way back to health." Marcus grinned. "I had good examples to follow," he said, his eyes twinkling, "and the best doctors money could buy, thanks to my future brother-in-law." As the evening wound down, Kayana stepped onto Tanya's small balcony for a moment of quiet reflection. So much had changed in the past year, from being a housekeeper to becoming a nursing student engaged to one of the city's most eligible bachelors. But through it all, she had remained true to herself and to the values her mother had instilled in her. Tanya joined her on the balcony, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Penny, for your thoughts?" "I was just thinking about Mom," Kayana admitted, wondering what she would think of all this. She'd be over the moon, Tanya said confidently. Not because you're marrying a rich man. She wouldn't care about that. But because you found someone who sees your worth, who respects you as an equal. That's what I think too, Kayana said softly. You know, Tanya continued, Mom always said you had a gift, the ability to see what others missed, especially when it came to health. She called it what the heart saw. Kayana smiled at the phrase. What the heart saw, she repeated. I like that. It fits, Tanya said. You saw Nate's heart condition when no one else did. And you saw his heart, the real him, when everyone else just saw his money or his position. And he saw me, Kayana added. Not just the housekeeper or the caregiver, but me. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, looking out at the city lights. Are you nervous about tomorrow? Tanya asked finally. Kayana considered the question. No, she realized. Not at all. For the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, with exactly who I'm supposed to be with. The wedding day dawned clear and beautiful. The hospital garden had been transformed with simple white flowers and greenery, creating an elegant but understated setting for the ceremony. As Kayana prepared in a small room inside the hospital, Dr. Stevenson knocked on the door. May I come in? Of course, Kayana said, surprised to see him. Is everything okay? Marcus. Marcus is fine, the doctor assured her quickly. That's not why I'm here. I wanted to give you something before the ceremony. He handed her a small gift box, a wedding present from the hospital staff. Inside the box was a delicate silver stethoscope pendant on a chain. It's beautiful, Kayana said, genuinely touched. It's also symbolic, Dr. Stevenson explained. Nathaniel has established a scholarship fund in your mother's name for nursing students who demonstrate exceptional empathy and diagnostic instincts. The kind of qualities you showed when you recognized his condition. Tears filled Kayana's eyes. He didn't tell me, she whispered. He wanted it to be a surprise, the doctor said with a smile. The first recipient will be selected next fall, when you're in your final year of nursing school. Kayana clasped the pendant around her neck, her heart full of emotion. This was the kind of man she was marrying, one who understood what truly mattered to her, who honored her past while helping her build a future. When it was time for the ceremony, Marcus walked her down the aisle. The gathering was small but filled with genuine warmth and love. And waiting for her at the altar was Nate, his eyes shining with a joy that matched her own. Their vows were simple and heartfelt, promises to support each other's dreams, to face life's challenges together, and to always see each other for who they truly were. You saw me when I was invisible, Kayana told him. You believed in me when I doubted myself. And you loved me enough to let me find my own way back to you. You saved my life in more ways than one, Nate responded. You taught me what real love looks like. Not a transaction or a power play, but a partnership of equals. I promise to spend every day trying to be worthy of the heart you've given me. As they exchanged rings and sealed their vows with a kiss, Kayana felt a sense of completion. This wasn't an ending, but a beginning, the start of a life built on mutual respect, understanding, and love. At the reception, held in the hospital's atrium, Nate surprised everyone by announcing another initiative in addition to the nursing scholarship. A new cardiac research center focused on early detection and treatment of rare heart conditions like the one he and Marcus shared. Life is precious, he told the gathered guests. And sometimes, it takes nearly losing it to understand what really matters. I'm grateful every day that Kayana had the courage to speak up, to trust her instincts, and to fight for me even when I couldn't fight for myself. Later, as they danced together for the first time as husband and wife, Kayana rested her head on Nate's shoulder. Thank you for the scholarship, she whispered. My mother would have been so honored. It was the least I could do, Nate replied. After all, if she raised a daughter with the courage and compassion to save a stranger's life, she deserves to be remembered. We're hardly strangers now, Kayana said with a smile. No, Nate agreed, pulling her closer. We're family. You, me, Tanya, Marcus, the kids, we're all family now. As the evening drew to a close, Kayana found herself standing with Marcus by the garden fountain. Her brother looked healthier than he had in months, his color good, his energy restored. How are you feeling? She asked, a habit she couldn't break even on her wedding day. Marcus smiled. I'm good. Kentucky really good. The new medication is working, and Dr. Stevenson says my latest tests show significant improvement. I'm so glad, Kiana said, squeezing his hand. You scared me, you know. I know, Marcus admitted. But in a weird way, I'm almost grateful it happened. If Nate hadn't gotten sick first, if you hadn't recognized the symptoms in me. He shook his head. Things happen for a reason, don't they? Kiana thought about the unlikely chain of events that had brought her to this moment. Taking the job with Nate, noticing his symptoms, fighting for him when no one else would, falling in love despite all the obstacles. Yes, she said softly. I believe they do. As if summoned by her thoughts, Nate appeared beside them. Sorry to interrupt, he said, but our car is ready whenever you are. Marcus gave his sister a final hug. Go, he said. Enjoy your honeymoon. I promise not to have any medical emergencies while you're gone. Kiana laughed. You'd better not. As they said their goodbyes and prepared to leave, Kiana took one last look around at the people who had become her extended family. Not just her blood relatives, but the hospital staff who had supported them, the friends who had stood by them, and of course, the man who now stood beside her as her husband. In the car, as they pulled away from the hospital, Nate took her hand. Happy, he asked. Kiana nodded, her heart full. More than I ever thought possible. Me too, Nate said, his voice soft with wonder. You know, when I first hired you, I was just looking for someone to keep my house in order. I never imagined you'd end up putting my entire life in order. And I never imagined that taking that job would lead me here, Kiana replied. It's funny how life works out, isn't it? It's not just life, Nate said, bringing her hand to his lips. It's what the heart sees when we're brave enough to look. As they drove toward their future together, Kiana knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as they had faced everything else, with courage, compassion, and the deep understanding that comes from truly seeing each other, heart to heart. And back at Tanya's apartment, as Marcus prepared to return to college, he paused to check his medication schedule, the careful regimen that was keeping his heart condition under control. As he studied the list of pills and dosages, he noticed something he hadn't before. A handwritten note at the bottom of the page in Nate's distinctive handwriting. Remember, the heart sees what truly matters. Take care of yours, brother. Nate. Marcus smiled, tucking the note carefully into his wallet. His sister had found a good man, one who understood that family was about more than blood, and that some bonds, once formed, could never be broken. The future stretched out before all of them, uncertain in many ways, but bright with possibility. And whatever came next, they would face it together, guided by what their hearts saw in each other. The end.